Imagine giving your entire life over to a church community. The late nights, the sermons, the friendships that even feel like family, only to be told 2 weeks later, resign or we're going to fire you. That's what happened to my friend Josh Ham. There was no scandal, no sin, just disagreement over doctrine. And in a matter of days, his ministry, his home, and his community were all gone. But God was good to Josh, and that's not where his story ends. The thing is that most people think that when they're being hurt by a church, they've been hurt by the church. But what if those aren't the same thing? What if church hurt isn't a wound necessarily from the body of Christ, but a wound from an institution that claimed his name? Whatever you think of institutional church or anything like that, there has to be a difference there. Because if we're hurt by one thing, but then we get rid of the community of Jesus because we don't feel safe, it's going to shipwreck our faith, and we're going to make a huge error. So for Josh and me, that distinction was life-saving. Because when something goes on in the nonprofit or the Sunday event or the system itself breaks your heart, you start to realize the church isn't a building or a brand. It's the people of God, scattered and alive, still capable of love, even when the structure fails. Both of us know what that exile feels like. One day we were leading worship or preaching from the stage or teaching youth, and the next you're told you're dangerous, divisive, even a heretic, and maybe even compared with the devil like I was. And then suddenly you're out. And in the silence that followed, God rebuilt something deeper in both of us. Deeper than a position, deeper than a platform. He rebuilt us. God teaches you to love his people again, even the ones who wounded you. He gives you new family, new calling, and new eyes to see that what looked like rejection was really redirection. This is a story about how grace meets us in the aftermath and how you can find life again on the other side of church hurt. And ultimately, that's what this conversation with Josh is about. He was with us last year, and what took place in this video that we talk about happened only a few weeks after we hit publish on that video. But this episode is about rediscovering that the real ecclesia and learning how to trust Jesus again, even when you can't trust the place that said it represented him. It's about what happens when faith and belonging collide, what it looks like to lose almost everything in the name of conviction, and how God somehow shows up in the rubble to start rebuilding a life that's as honest, as grounded, and somehow as alive as it can possibly be by his grace. I was so grateful for his willingness to come back on and have this conversation with me. It was deeply life-giving for me, and I think it'll be deeply life-giving for you as well. Well, hey, Josh, good to have you on the program, man. It's been a year.
It's good to see you. Yes, it has
Literally.
been a little while. Obviously, we've connected several times over this year, but it's fun to be back within your channel on a topic that's near and dear to both our hearts. So, looking forward to this.
Yeah. Yeah, 1000%. Yeah, I've been thinking about it a lot. There's so many people that I've gotten connected with as a result of doing this YouTube thing, and I'm still just so grateful. You were a big encouragement to me, and you have been throughout the whole past year, being active in the Facebook group, sending me stuff, all the psych gifs and memes, like everything that's just it's a shot in the arm whenever I get to hear from Josh. But it has literally been over a year since the first video we put together and put out on my channel. That was last September. And now here we are by the time this goes live, probably sometime in mid-October. So it has been a year. We've both been through a lot of interesting things since then, but you in particular had some pretty interesting turns and twists in your story. And I think they were appropriate for what we were talking about then, and it's appropriate for what we're talking about now. What are some of the things that have taken place in your life and in your neck of the woods in the past year or so?
Yeah, so it's almost ironic that we were talking about healthy church and talking about how God was working in our life and ministry, and then not too long later, I'm no longer at that ministry. And long story short, there was several other things happening um, within the leadership at our church that I was working toward and trying to keep moving things in a healthy direction. We had come a long way on so many fronts, um, but there was some residual things that had kind of come up that we were trying to navigate well, um, and certain people that were being treated unfairly, even within our church, because of what I would consider very, very minor things. And it kind of hit me, well, if they're getting treated that way because of that, I'm working through, several other things. And how is that going to be received well or not? And wind up looking into some of our church documents and recognize certain things on paper that I was supposed to hold due to the wording of our church documents, that I was in trouble. And so came to the other leadership, kind of poured my heart out of like, here's I'm at. We want to be here, but I can't lie and say I believe something that I don't, at least not 100% as I'm required to. And long story short, 2 weeks later, I was told to resign or they would terminate me, and it was going to be a big mess. And just through prayer and counsel, um, we felt I needed to resign and not drag the church into all that, which was something I did not want to do. Um, and it was quite the the 2 week process, for sure.
Yeah, no kidding. And yeah, the timing is just absolutely wild on that. I know that what we were talking about was healthy church cultures, and we wanted to have that conversation from a place of, man, what can we do in whatever church context we would call, right? Like if you would be using the word church as like, yeah, the 501c3 nonprofit that puts on the event that I show up to on a Sunday, like I would have a different definition, but we could still say like, how do we have a healthy church context in that kind of way? We could still have that conversation, right? But it was, and it's remains to be seen if this was healthy or unhealthy, right? What went on in your world and what went on in my world. There's some differences there. Certainly, I think, from my understanding, you could correct me if I'm wrong. Some of the things that they were wanting to know about or things that they were wanting to talk about. It was
Yeah.
doctrinal stances on certain things, right? And so we definitely don't want to be wishy-washy on doctrinal stances, um, but there might be some ways it could be taken too
Yeah.
far. So I had a similar experience a year and a half ago, and I've landed in a different spot now. But I mean, obviously, you still love your old church community. We
Yeah.
still think fondly about the place that we were a year and a half ago. Certainly, not one word will pass from our lips in criticism of any individual specific person or bringing up any names or anything like that, or even the names of those ministries. That's not our goal here. But I think that what we're going to both try to do is we want to, and you can tell me if you're on board with this plan. We're trying to look into how to handle church hurt in a healthy way, how to navigate church, doctrinal things. What is the nonprofit doing? Is it valuable? What's valuable about it? All of those different pieces, and then how we navigate all of that well in relationship with the church, meaning the ecclesia, the community of God's people, and if there's any hope for us in the midst of what are some pretty crazy times.
Yeah, definitely.
Does that sound
For
about
sure.
right? Wonderful. Um, so we've got a little bit of what happened immediately after we put out our video and you had your crazy 2 week stretch there. Um, but a lot of time has passed since even then. So what happened in the weeks and months that followed even that?
So the initial fallout, for lack of a better word, was pretty quick. Um, I thought it could have at first be more amicable and where I could even still try to help in that transition. And just due to how things were handled, it was very clear that I wasn't wanted there, believing what I believed. And, that was so different, which really
Yeah.
wasn't. And so we lived in the parsonage in the same parking lot as the church building. So obviously that was very difficult, especially, for my wife and kids. My kids are like, why can't we go to church anymore? Trying to have that kind of
Yeah.
conversation and trying to, there's only so much you can explain to, yeah, our oldest was, 5 at the time. And then after my wife, very emotional. So we're trying to leave in the morning to go visit just other friends in the area before people are pulling into the parking lot, just because it was awkward and difficult on that front. And so the next 3 or 4 weeks, we packed up and moved. At first, we weren't sure where we were going to go. Our backup plan was just to move in with my in-laws or my parents just till we could figure things out. And thankfully, God in His goodness, in the midst of those 2 weeks, brought a dear man into our life who was a retired pastor who was chaplain at the camp, Christian camp in our area. I was actually having breakfast with him just to kind of get to know him better when all this was taking place and kind of like, this is what I'm going through. And he was just like huge support, comfort, and encouragement through that. And just in a very short period of time, he's like, "Hey, you have a house you can stay in for as long as you need on one of their camp properties," and
Wow.
basically got to be their neighbor with him and his wife for the next 3 or 4 months or so, just to give us kind of a breather while we were trying to figure out what to do, where to go. Had a small group at their house, so we got to be a part of just with them. It was just incredible, just because of some of the relationships that we lost very quickly. We're very much like grandparents to our kids in our church, and now
Yeah.
God brought another dear family to help us walk through that and kind of be there for family to give some stability. And then we had many other friends in the area that were huge help, other pastor friends and things like that, that we get to go and visit a few different churches and just kind of uh, just sit in the pews for a while, which was very weird for a few weeks, especially instead of preaching almost every week. It was very different on that front. I had the part-time job I was working, I was able to keep working at there. Just a huge blessing. My boss there is a Christian. Just so many people God used to just wrap their arms around us. Some of them were probably more upset than us due to the situation. Um, and it was just really neat to see the body of Christ just love on us through that time.
Yeah. Man, that's wild. So and so, most people when there's upheaval, it might be, we lose our church community or our job or our home. Certainly not necessarily all three at once, right? So for a little while there, all you guys had to cling to was God and one
Yeah,
another, and he came through, and that's deeply encouraging. Obviously it's difficult, it's not something I would ever wish on anybody, but I can just say for me in my scenario, like we've had a wild 6 months even in our family, and things that have been going on in our world as well. And so just whenever I hear stories of God at work in other people's lives, it reminds me so much of Jesus's words to the people that John the Baptist sent to go ask him if he was the one to come or if they should expect another. And what Jesus doesn't say, there's two things he doesn't say. He doesn't say, "Yeah, John, 100%, I'm the guy. How dare you, doubt me? This is ridiculous. We were cousins, for goodness sake." He doesn't say that. He also doesn't say, "100% John, I'm gonna come and bust down those prison bars and come get you out. Like you got the right guy. We're coming. Thanks for letting me know there's a problem. I got you." Right? He doesn't say that either. Um, what he says to the delegation, to the guys to get sent back to John the Baptist, his own cousin in prison, about to be executed, what he says to him is, tell him what y'all see, that the blind are given their sight, that the lame walk, that the deaf receive their hearing. And then as they're turning around to leave, he pauses them and says, "Oh, and blessed is anyone who doesn't stumble on account of me." You know, and so it's good to see God at work in the world. It's good to see, figuratively speaking, the maybe even literally speaking, blind receiving sight, to see, lame people being able to walk again, and in your case, cataclysmic upheaval in life being met with the faithful among God's people coming alongside you guys as friends, even if there is still disagreement on doctrine or anything like that. Just the loving disposition of God's people coming around you guys and lifting y'all up and helping you to be born forward and moving forward, and still having what you need and having your needs met. That's just absolutely beautiful to me. So praise God for all those people too.
yeah, and it was really neat, even within the church, how many were supportive of us, and a lot of them were confused. Were, why do you have to leave over this? And I was like, that's a great question. That was not my decision. That was not what I was wanting to happen. Um, and I got a few of them in trouble for continuing those
Yeah.
questions, unfortunately, but it just the way it happened. And that was probably the hardest to see of people I cared
Yeah.
about that got caught in the middle. That they, you know, shouldn't have had to be in the middle of anything, but it was just the reality of the situation and just how things.
Yeah. I know that guilt very intimately, unfortunately. I can kind of call back to some parallels in our own experience as well, where, we were under the impression this would have been Father's Day, I think, of last year, back in June. And so we were we were under the impression we had had many lengthy conversations around doctrinal differences and things like that, and I had laid out essentially my plan for most of that time was to say I always was very forthright, very forthcoming around like, hey, I know that this is what we have in our statement of faith, and I wasn't a pastor, so it was a different role. I did have kind of like a high level, frequent teaching ministry. I was one of the two or three people that was most involved in the teaching there and did a lot of music ministry, a lot of teens ministry, kids ministry, stuff like that. We pinch hit in a bunch of different areas. Um, but there was always the forthrightness to say like, hey, so this is the way that I'm seeing this thing now. That's not an issue for me. Most people I know disagree with me about that. So like totally normal if that's not something I promise. I promise will not teach from the pulpit ever. That's not something I'm going to give in private, pastoral conversations. If a teen comes and asks me something, we're not going to talk about it in that way. I'll give them, a better answer that's going to be more, allowing for there to still be unity, even if we disagree on this thing. And the problem was that happened like 6 times. So then they're like, what does this guy even believe?
Yeah.
But our transition out from that period was great in while we were there. It was a lot of smiling and waving and everything's going to be fine. We're going to miss you guys. Take care. Until our last day, the rest of the community was not informed that we were leaving. We had our whole Father's Day thing at the end. I was under the impression there was going to be a conversation had with the church as a whole, saying like, hey, the Barber family is leaving. This is going to be their last Sunday, say bye to them and shake hands. Because that had happened with other families. It didn't happen with us, and I was a little confused there. And then that was Sunday night. By that Wednesday, there was an emergency leadership meeting called where a lot of things were said about me and my wife in particular that were just flat out untrue, including that I said I was the administrador of the church, which sounds a lot different in Spanish, because I was the admin on the Facebook page. So they were like, look, proof is he's the guy. He's saying he's the one calling the shots, and he doesn't think most of you are saved. And I was compared with the devil and all kinds of things like that. So it was a pretty wild time. But we had the same experience of the ecclesia coming around us and surrounding us with their arms and bearing us up and praying for us and being there as a fountain of encouragement. And it was difficult because we also got to see, again, for me, the most painful thing was seeing my mother-in-law go through that and say, you are not telling the truth about what happened with my son-in-law. Like, I read the letter that he sent. I read all of this. I've been here. We know where he stands on this. I heard the conversations we all had together about this or that thing, and you're misrepresenting him. And then they were no longer welcome there, and it was heartbreaking. I had a lot of people reaching out, asking questions like, "What happened here?" And I'm like, I can tell you my side. I can tell you my part of the story. But if you have any intention of staying, then it might be more wise for you to not talk to me at all, because I'm now persona non grata there. But that was more heartbreaking than anything that happened to us. We ended up being just fine, and I think that you had a just fine story too, which is coming. But that was hard too, for sure.
And especially when, as a whole, it was a lot of support, but there's a few key people that over time we realized there was more under the surface that wasn't said initially. You can always beat yourself up.
Yeah.
If you'd known certain things, you might have handled it differently. And the very next Sunday after I left, they literally showed a video, basically, of the official church's position and why it is the only view on eschatology. And there's a few people who are not happy that that took place. And I was just kind of like, and then things said to us or about us that we, heard through the grapevine. And the Hardstones are the ones, a couple people to us. One of my closest friends basically called me a heretic, false teacher, and just it got ugly pretty quick. And it was finally, it's like, you're not hearing me. You're not representing what I'm actually saying to you. And eventually I was like, if you're going to treat me this way, I'm not going to keep responding to it. When you won't even pick up the phone to talk to me, you just want to keep blasting. And that was tough to see, especially for my wife, because she's a fighter and, wanted to fight on my behalf. And it's just like, time hopefully will heal. And so,
Yeah.
and again,
We'll touch on that
yes,
later,
for
won't we?
sure.
Here's hoping. Yeah, man, there's a lot that I want to touch on there, to be honest. There's a million different directions we could take it. But the key thing, kind of like the main inciting incident for us in our story was also, a family with whom we were just absolutely like hearts knit together, intertwined, lives integrated. Like our kids were in each other's homes 5 days out of a week, and that's not an exaggeration. Like we would watch their kiddos so that they could go on date nights, and we did the same thing. And then they had a Friday night, Bible Institute thing that they were doing to kind of like brush up on some doctrinal stuff. We'd watch their kids for that, and then of course on Sunday we'd be together, and then after Sunday, probably good solid 9 times out of 10 on a Sunday afternoon, they'd come over to our house and we'd watch the Broncos game out here in Colorado. And so that family was the family that just like flipped on us. There was a difficult conflict situation that we tried to handle. They made it clear they didn't want me in particular involved in any way in the kind of counseling capacity. Uh, and that was when the first like inklings that there was some suspicion on their part about my doctrine came out, where they had sort of slowly been apparently developing the conviction that I was not fit to teach. I was not fit to give any kind of counsel or anything like that. And maybe I'm not even a trustworthy person, was kind of the tone and timbre that it took. Like my character was in question there. And then I don't know how to say it other than a lot of lies were told. A lot of things were constructed out of whole cloth. A lot of like misrepresentations of our stances, or even our my relationship with my wife. It was said that we had like an open marriage was one of the accusations that was being made, and things like that. And it's just like, where in the heck did that come from? But something in particular that you said um, really stood out to me as something that I think people often miss the point here when it comes to two biblical phrases. One of them is heretic or heresy, and then the other one is false teacher, right? So I also every other day am called a heretic and a false teacher. Just read my occasional YouTube comments or things like that. Um, but I think that there's a problem. You can tell me if you've got the same understanding of what's going on in these terms. But when I read heresis, the Greek word, right, heresis, the word that we get heresy from or heretic from, it's not really about a false belief or like an aberrant doctrine at all, really. It's a choice, it seems, to be divisive and to stand apart, right? Which is why seems like Pete, I believe it's Peter, can talk about the false teachers who bring damnable heresies into the church by their false teaching. It's as if they're separate things. It's like you're being a divisive person who is chopping up the body of Christ and apportioning them out based on where you stand on X, Y, or Z doctrinal thing. And I think that was really interesting for me to go and study, because it's like, wow, you can have the right doctrine and be heretical about it. You can be so divisive even if you are correct, if it's not a salvific doctrine, because I agree we divide at the barrier where it is no longer this person is an actual follower of Jesus, but the things that make up that list are so few and so obviously central that we need to look at those things, and we'll talk about that in a minute too. But like, you can have a doctrine that, hey, look, got some good biblical warrant. Might be something that is true. Other people disagree with you. They have their points too. Maybe yours is the best case that could be made. But you can have that correct doctrine in a way that is heretical, because what you want to do with it is divide brothers and sisters who otherwise shouldn't
Yeah.
be divided. Is that Do you have the same understanding of that term, or am I way
Yeah,
off
and
base
that's
here?
pretty much exactly what happened in my
Yeah.
situation, where it was almost, I think, came across, or at least they took it as I was trying to be divisive, teach these other things, and I was very clear in all the meetings and the things I put together to give them. It's like, I'm trying to unite us. I'm not trying to draw bold lines where it's not shouldn't be a bold line. On churches have always
Yeah.
disagreed on eschatology. Like, this doesn't need to be a separation issue for our church. And it was those types of things. And And I think that was frustrating because it was treated as, "We're not even gonna talk about this," because that was what I had thought was gonna happen. They asked me to put things in paper and writing, and I said, "Yeah, that's fine." You know, I didn't even get into the weeds much. It was more kinda like sharing my heart of, like, these things don't have to be divisive, just thinking this is gonna be the beginning of the conversation, and then there was no conversation. I literally got it in a text, "We disagree with everything you said. We're gonna discuss how you're gonna leave." That was how it was handled, and that was probably the most frustrating part. It was like they didn't even give me a chance to hear me out. Is how it felt, on my end, and a lot of people kind of thought the same way. But there was a fear of, well, if you change on these, what else are you going to change on? That was literally what was told to me. I was like, well, I'm going to follow whatever the Bible says. I don't have it all figured out. I don't claim to have it all figured out. And it's like, well, you're in your 30s. You should have it all figured out by now. It's just like, no one has it figured out. We're to be a learner. And
Yeah.
especially on, very debated things, of like, I wasn't even saying we need to switch positions. It was, we just don't need to have a hard position on this. My eschatology is Jesus coming back. Do I have more thoughts on that? For sure. But that is the line of what I would consider heresy.
What's to disagree about?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
So, yeah.
Man. Or false teaching, right? Because maybe it's that you have a heretical stance with correct doctrine. Now you can have a heretical stance with false
Yeah.
doctrine too, but the hyresis is not necessarily describing the truth or false claim of the doctrine held so much as it is the attitude and spirit with which it's
Yes.
held. But the false teaching is a different one because you can have a false teaching or false doctrine, but not a false teacher, right? So those are also unique. Where false teaching is any teaching that's false. Okay,
Yeah.
that's wrap that up, tie it in a bow. That's great. We're fine there. But that's not what is in view when a false teacher, biblically speaking, is in view. At least not. It's not limited to that.
Yeah.
Where you're also looking at this person's fruit, and you're looking at this person's motives. What is this person
Yeah.
doing with their teaching role? Are they heaping up followers on themselves and not magnifying Christ, not
Yeah.
pointing people in the direction of Jesus? Are they denying something really actually central about Jesus that John might call an antichrist spirit or something like that? Are they denying something about like his coming in the flesh, his being God, his death being the way and the means that created rescue for us, and his resurrection and then his coming back again? Are we denying something there, or are we just saying, well, people understand Revelation 20 a little differently, and they think the millennium part
Yeah.
might be this, they think it might be
Yep.
this, right? It's like so a false teacher is someone who teaches false things with false motives, where they're wanting to self-aggrandize, they're wanting to pridefully lift themselves up even at other people's expense. Maybe there's a deception play there. There's sinfulness, hidden sinfulness of some kind, or public sinfulness of some
Yeah.
kind, right? Where that seems to me, when I'm reading about false teachers and I get to First John, and I'm reading about, in First John 4, where he says, beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they're from God. For many false prophets have gone out into the world. By this you'll know the Spirit of God, that every spirit that confesses that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is from God, and every spirit that does not confess Jesus is not from God. So it's like, that's a pretty narrowly defined stretch of things that might make a false prophet or a false teacher. And again, it's like, so maybe our doctrine in some ways is wrong. I don't think any of us has it 100% right. So are we all false teachers? Are we all false prophets? Or is there a more strict standard as far as what counts as this person? This is a believer. This is not a believer. This is a false teacher. This is not a false teacher. This is a heretic. This is not a heretic.
And I could have gone stealth Calvinist mode and like not said anything, and that I understand the temptation now. Um, but once I
Yeah.
realized the letter of the law, according to our documents, I couldn't not say something. And I think maybe that's why they perhaps took it wrongly, because they felt, oh, you were working through this, you never told us, and you just came out of nowhere. And I was like, well, I didn't say anything because I was still working through it, one, but also knew that the church wasn't ready for those conversations. It forced my hand once I realized how explicit that it was. of what I had to hold as the pastor, and I just couldn't. I told him, I was like, I just can't lie. And they even said, well, if you can keep those things yourself personally as long as you don't preach differently from the pulpit. And I'm like, well, I can't do that. And again, if I come to this passage and say some people
Yeah.
see it this way and this way, here's how you. And I had done that with other things, so it wasn't like that was a new thing either. But it just what happened and how it was
Yeah.
taken. But
Yeah. That skill in particular is one of the things I admire most in someone who is a teacher, because there's always I would call it a temptation. Others might call it a strategy, but there's the temptation to tell people what to think, because you're just that confident you've got it right. And on some things, again, Jesus coming in the flesh, I'm going to say that one
yeah,
confidently. Jesus dying and then being buried in a tomb of Joseph of Arimathea, and then rising again on the third day, and then ascending up to heaven, where he now reigns from the right hand of God the Father and will forever and ever, before he and then he'll return. Like, those are things I'm going to confidently say, yes, this is what you should think, but here's why. Here's the evidence for why. But there's so often not that same effort given in teaching people how to think, especially about disputed things where it's like the church has been arguing about this. The people of God have been, in disagreement on this with scripture as their guide. Everybody who has this has their biblical case that they make. I think the millennium is a good example. Or eschatology is a good example. No view arises self-evidently from the text that has a full systematic, clearly spelled out. Every view has its warts, its problem verses. And this is one of those things that I admire about, for men like Steve Gregg or Tim Mackey as teachers, where Steve Gregg wrote a book on 4 views of Revelation, and half the reviews on the Amazon page for the book say, this is a great book. I have no idea which view is the author's. He just tried to lay everything out so objectively and so clearly, and he just wants to leave it for you to decide. And it's like, I feel personally as though that's a mark of a skilled teacher, of a good teacher who wants to teach you how to think and how to parse the different aspects behind which view you're going to land on, and can show you how prior commitments over here might lead you to think about this in this way over here, and how to kind of navigate that, rather than just being sort of dogmatically cramming it down. That's a person who at least is not going to be heretical in that way with their views. They're not going to be divisive. They're going to be willing to accept on non-essentials.
Yeah.
They're going to be able to give the charity to be able to say, people differ. Good men differ.
And I was thinking of Steve Gregg as you were talking about that.
Yeah.
But it was, it was very much of a fear thing. At least that's what it seemed like. Of it's easier to put things in a neatly packaged box, a pre-programmed, here's what to think on all the things. And again, to some extent, you do need some parameter, whether it's Nicene Creed, whatever you want that gives, here's the core essentials. But yeah, the how to think, that's totally changed my life of the last few years of relearning how to think. And it's been life altering, but it is scary because then you have to apply that to everything. And was the old saying, a truth that can't be tested can't be trusted. And that's a scary thing to do if you've believed something your whole life. And it's easier to say, I'm not even going to open that box because don't know what's going to happen when I do that. And for me, it's just, I'm not going to be afraid to do that, wherever that looks like, whatever that takes me. And I understand why a lot of individual churches struggle with that, because of it takes the right person to lead through that if you've only been in a certain kind of box. And I was hoping and wanting to continue that journey there, but it didn't happen. And but again, God was good to us. So
Yeah, right. Well, and so, I want to get into the concept a little bit of, like, church hurt, which for me, church hurt, because I don't think of the church as the nonprofit. And again, there's disagreement here. I've got dear friends who are Orthodox who think I'm crazy whenever I say this. including people who are very active in my Facebook community, and I love them to I love them to
I know you're
absolute
talking.
pieces. Yeah, love you, Amber. Anyway, like so things like this where it's like the church in my view isn't a institution. It's not a 501c3 nonprofit here in the United States. It's not the event you go to on a Sunday. It's not the the place that you go to, the building. It's not a movement even. It's not any of those things. The church might make use of some of those things, but the church is God's people in the world wherever they may be found. There's the universal church is the concept we have from Scripture, where there's the church, and you're talking about all people who form Christ's body everywhere on earth. And I would even say my Catholic friends have an argument that the ones who have passed away might be included in that number still as a participating group. There's some disagreement there, but they have a case to make at the very least. But if that's the actual church, that's the ecclesia. I think of church hurt as mostly being the stuff that is done by the ecclesia because of one of these other views of what the church is, where something comes up that the institution needs to have done, or that the institution thinks is important, or that is important to the nonprofit for the nonprofit's reasons, over and against what's good for the people and what's good for the community of followers there. Or something happens where there's a big event that needs to happen on a Sunday. Maybe there's a conference, or there's something going on, and there's extra stress put on that event, and then there's all these demands from the people to be able to pull that event off, and something happens that causes an injury to a part of the body, right? So I kind of think of church hurt that way. That's been my working definition for a while. And that's why the ecclesia, God's people, can be so, and are, and must be so centrally important to helping kind of navigate and heal after that. And your story told that beautifully. So if we can just kind of grant, you can push back and redefine however you'd like, but like if we start from that idea of church hurt, like in your case, it sounded like an impulse on the part of other people who were in leadership to protect what they thought was core to the functioning of that local assembly and that nonprofit with its statement of faith, that it was going to be uncompromising about this in a way that caused harm to a member of the body, and then gave another opportunity for other people in the body to come around and minister to that piece of that part of the body of Christ, that member of the body of Christ. Does that way of thinking through it make sense? Because that helped me a lot when navigating church hurt for us.
For sure. And it was interesting because that was the first time in mine and my wife's life that we were functionally church homeless. And because I grew up in church, and even if I was transitioning, I was heading somewhere, in our life for ministry. And so it was the first time we woke up on a Sunday and we're like, we don't have a specific entity that we are attached to. And it felt very weird. And in one sense, it was a little bit freeing just because we could go and visit our friends at churches, things like that. But it was very quickly, immediately, like for our family, it's like we needed some semi grounding. So we visited a few, but our one friend's church we went to the most, just kind of as a home base. We had several friends there and stuff like that. But yeah, it was just interesting to walk through that season, and God brought people into our lives to fill that role in different ways. Like the dear couple that helped us with the housing, and that we are part of their small group. That in a sense was kind of our church during that time, that community, and it was interesting, and gave me a lot of insight of other people who walked through that. Like I've had family who have gone through seasons where looking for that home, as we think of it that way, that specific, not the bill, as we know, it's not the building.
That branch of the family
Yes.
tree. Yeah, that branch of the family tree. Because that's where we ended up too. We went through this whole thing, and what was the most jarring, I didn't care about going to the building or not. I didn't care about, being able to be in that place or stand in a piece of property owned by that nonprofit. That didn't matter to me at all. I was jarred by my sudden disconnection and lack of family relational harmony with a group of people that we'd really grown to love. and that was the hardest part. I could give or take a lot of what happened on a Sunday. You study enough, at some point you're not necessarily going to be learning anything new. You might be exhorted to take seriously what you already know from a message, but you're not likely to learn much new after a certain period of study. And that's still the case for me, even though I really love hearing the Word of God taught and preached. I do enjoy that so deeply. But like, that was the jarring part. And so we were in a similar boat during our walk through this whole unfortunate process, where I definitely got to sort of the most toxically I had ever held my view of what the church is, to where I'll never forget, I was in the middle of my living room and I uttered the sentence, "I am never setting foot in an institutional church ever again." And that was my response to our experience there. And the two people that were in the room with me at the time when I uttered that were my wife, Marimar, and my best friend, Nate. And we were just all sitting together, and Marimar just said, like, basically, never say never, Tim. Like, if God called us to do that, we would obviously do that. If God invited us into that and it was clear that his hand was at work, we would do that. And I had to say, you're right. Like, it's just how I'm feeling right now. It's how I'm feeling. I don't ever want to step in foot in another one of those places again. And I was laying out my plan, which my plan was, I'm going to lean on the ecclesia, which I still, I'm thinking about this way. I feel this way. I was like, we have so many friends that we would be able to like do life with, and we want to be invested in one another's lives and helping one another grow. And I know that person, I view that person as an elder. I think I have skills that I can bring. I have a gifting that I've been given that I can bring to bear in intimate kind of like interpersonal relationship with these people, and we can all move forward and as a community of people where we're actually one anothering one another, and we can bring each other meals when somebody gets sick, or cover someone's rent if something goes wrong with them and they need help and they need a community to come around them. And I was walking through that whole thing, and I still feel that way. I still think whenever I'm doing those things, whenever we're in relationship with each other, those are the things where the church is at work. God is at work in the church wherever two or three are gathered in his name, even though that's a discipline passage. It's still true in other contexts. God is there with his people. But my friend Nate just says, well, where you would have a real easy time finding a whole bunch of those people on a random weekday. It's like, as if you went to one of those places on a Sunday, you'd get to know so many people. And they were both 100% right. And we also were, we're like, okay, fine, you're right. I want to reapproach this, entering into kind of an institutional context with a healthy understanding that thing isn't the church, but the people here are. How can I find more people to love, more people to get into contact with, and grow, to get to know and find ways to help out that community and all those things? And that ended up being what happened. And we had kind of a speed bump along the way where we stopped off at a church where there was some stealth Calvinism going on, and I sniffed it out and was like, nah, nope, that's going to be a problem. I'm debating James White in a month. That's not gonna go. So we ended up going from there. But we've been with our same church community now for a year and some change, year and almost a year and a half now, and it's been completely the other direction. So that's where we've landed, and then we can even unpack where we've landed. But there's a part of your story that we haven't gotten to yet, which is after you're living in the home, there's the small group with this awesome couple, and you guys are neighbors and you're in each other's lives, and the ecclesia from all kinds of different sources has come around you guys and lifted you up and supported you. What happened after that?
And tying into that, I had the opposite initial reaction as you, where for me it was, we were so close to like having that where we were at. Like, if we had just worked through this doctor stuff, like, I think we would have been set. Like, that community was there, doing all those things. And so it's like, I want to find that as soon as I can, and even pastorally. And it didn't lessen my desire for ministry at all. It was, if anything, it fueled it, because of, okay, now I know what I'm looking for. Much more than I ever had before. And one book that was super helpful that my friend recommended is A Church Called Tove by Scott McKnight. And that book was so helpful of finding, and what is a healthy church culture look like, in whatever form that is, whatever denomination or what, it's what is the culture there and how to find that. And so I was working through all of that and trying to figure out, okay, what am I going to do from here, vocationally with this, and have stability for our family. And long story short, I had gotten reconnected with a friend of mine from undergrad who had his own journey because of the background I was in. We both kind of had separate journeys away from some of that, and we just somehow got in touch and just kind of sharing stories. And he was just kind of just a good sounding board with that. Several close mutual friends that kind of connected us, and they needed more help at a church staff wise. And he's like, would you be interested? And I was like, at this point, everything's so fresh. We have no
Wow.
idea what's going to happen. Like, this is all like within a month or so of things happening. But just as I talked to him, kind of heard what was going on there. It's like, well, I want to go somewhere like that. And it was just not geographically where we thought we would be. Um, but it was like, man, something like that sounds great. Well, fast forward 2 months, nothing's happened. I was getting frustrated. I was trying to, make things happen on my own, putting resumes, just all this stuff, just trying to make it work. Finally, it's just like, I need to stop and just, spend more time praying and, letting God open the right door at the right time. And we had a crazy 2 week stretch over Christmas. We were going down to see my family. We found out my mother-in-law had a seizure. Some big health stuff happened. A lot of things changed very quickly in a short amount of time. But through that, my friend had reached back out and said, "Hey, where you guys at? Just the other guy we looked at hired fell through, and just thought of you. Just throw it out there. Just Hail Mary if you're interested." And we began to talk more, and God just kind of put it all together. Just timing, logistics, just the role fit, even some of those doctrinal things that were issues at our last church. He's like, not that I would have to agree with you on all those things, but he's like, I'm on the same page with you on all those things, specific things. And it was just like God just kind of confirmed
Yeah.
everything. We were able to go just kind of visit for a little bit, just hang out with him and his wife. And then after just a day or so just doing that, my wife was like, this is where we need to be. And I didn't think she was going to be
Wow.
excited about being part of a church for a while due to just how things happen.
Yeah.
And it's like,
Understandably
yeah, it's
so.
like if she's in, I'm in, and God took care of all the details. And came on in April here at church here in Georgia, and
Mm.
it's just been awesome. And obviously, there's challenges everywhere you go, and things we knew up front we were gonna have to help work through. And but it was a team there, just some amazing people who have loved on our family so much from day one. And it's just been what we needed. This is where we needed to be,
Yeah.
just to have stability. We're help take care of my mother-in-law. My in-laws live with us.
Mhm.
Just a lot of things came together that were not what we would have planned, but God knew and brought it all together.
Yeah.
And still figuring things out. And obviously, my wife is expecting again with baby number 4, which all happened through this. And so that's coming up here in the next
Crazy.
month or so. So it's been one thing after another, and God has just been so good over and over again, bringing the right people, the right opportunity, just everything just came together. As soon as I took my hands off and let Him guide it, He did. So,
It's
yeah,
shocking how that happens. I know we were in the same boat where, yeah, as soon as we had that open-handed posture, really unbelievable, almost unbelievable things started to happen. And so that's where you guys landed. And then there's also a piece of the story after that. In our world, again, just kind of retreading that same part of the story, the two things that were most important to us when we started, I hate the phrase church shopping. It's not at all how I think about it. But the two things that were really, really important to us as we were going out as kind of like a minimum basic non-negotiables for whether we're going to be able to coexist in this space helpfully, or whether I'm going to continue to have to, write letters of saying like, well, look, we don't agree with this, we don't agree with this, and all that. Like, what can we look at as these are the things that are likely to set us up for success in the future, to where we can be there we're not going to cause them any problems, and they're not going to, we're not going to wear out our welcome. They're going to want to get rid of us or something like that. What do we need to have in place? Aside from the basics of like, they believe as a principle, on a principled level, that the Bible is God's word and it's the source of truth. And the Bible is how we ascertain truth. It's how we find the right path forward. It's the source. It's the way that we figure out what doctrine comes from God himself. And it's the source of it, all that stuff. And obviously central truths about Jesus is God and all this stuff. We're not going to be wishy-washy on those things, because I do think those are the non-negotiables. But as far as like stepping into a new community where things are done a certain way, what were the things that we needed to see in order for us to feel confident that we'd be able to be there? Well, there were two main things. Number one was we wanted to see a plurality of elders, ideally a plurality of elders where they disagreed with each other on things. And so we had been just in a scenario where there was a lot of abuse, and I think of abuse and toxicity and power as kind of when you're talking about a church called Tove, that's a lot of what they have kind of in the crosshairs that they're trying to help deal with, is the way that things can go wrong when power is consolidated into the hands of one or two or a few people, and what sorts of abuses and destructive behaviors can come from that. I did a whole video on this, comparing it to the One Ring, having that power in hand, and how dangerous that is as a temptation. But especially one where they're not all of one mind on these are the non-negotiables. We have to view things this way. Like if they're amongst themselves able to co-labor and able to be together and work together for the good of the gospel, for the progress of the gospel, while disagreeing on eschatology, while disagreeing on this or that secondary thing, that was super important to us. I can almost, like in retrospect, I can almost not believe how much of that is present in the community we've landed in now, where one of the guys leading is a Calvinist, and another one is decidedly not a Calvinist, like a very, very much just, we'll call it not Calvinist. He's a fan of like Leighton Flowers and his work, and watched my debate and said, yeah, I think you made a lot of really good points, whether he agrees with my ultimate stance on like open theism or not. But they all know about all my stances. What I did was maybe a little weird, but I came in and just said, this is where I'm at. I'm going to lay my cards out on the table. We are not going to be weird about this. This is where we've come from. These are some of the things that I believe. I completely respect when people disagree with me about that. Most of my friends do. I see things this way, and this way. I'm never going to make that an issue. I'm not looking even to have like any kind of a teaching presence here. That is not necessarily even our goal. We want to get to know other people who genuinely love Jesus and be in just community with them and do things like take each other food when someone loses a job or gets sick. Like that's our goal, which was the second thing, which was honest to God community focus, where it's not everything is revolving around having people in the pews on a Sunday as the North Star metric, or having a major giving budget that came in for this or that day, where we're trying like the things, the KPIs that we as an organization are moving forward are this or that thing. It was, man, how many people in here are like, what percentage of our people are actually actively being more formed into the image of Jesus in the world? And are we being a light in our community? Are we being a city on a hill? And are we growing together more? Because, love is the way that the world outside is going to know that we belong to Jesus and that he is who he says he is and that we're his disciples. And it was like, if we can get on the same page about, yeah, there's more than one guy in charge. They tend to disagree about things and they still love each other. And we're actually trying to like have relationships with each other. And that's a main goal. It was like we were going to be able to find a place that had those things. We were going to be over the moon about it. And I was, I reached out to one of the guys who led one of the small groups in our community at the church community out here, and he kind of coordinated me getting together and grabbing some coffee with one of the guys who is in the small group. And I, again, maybe a little forward and awkward about like, hey, this is where I'm at on these things. And he was like, yeah, sounds like that was probably a pretty difficult season for you guys to navigate. I could see why you'd be hoping for that. This place might be this might be the right community for you. And we've just been feels like we've been there for 10 years now because of where we're at now, so we even did things like last night we had a instead of doing our normal small group stuff on a Wednesday, last night we had a whole gospel presentation thing that was going to be a thing you could invite people to. And they asked me if I would be one of the question discussion group leaders. And I'm like, yes, absolutely. I love discussing things. So we're just overjoyed. I go back there every month on Sunday mornings and make about 100 lattes because we have a whole thing where we make people coffee in the mornings as a hospitality thing that we do. And it's awesome. It's a very different environment and we're thrilled to be there. So that's where I'm caught up to even today. There is, I feel like I found a church you could say is a church called Tove, where it is good in that way. There is not that abuse, and there's checks in place to prevent it from happening because the men know that they're fallible, and we don't want to have consolidation of power and one monolithic vision crammed down and make everybody follow and obey. And it just led to so many difficulties for us. And they were like, yeah, we don't want that. So you guys landed in a community where you guys are now contributing again. And the point that you said where it's like, it's not that I have to be on the same page with you about these things, but I am on the same page with you about these things. That's super refreshing. And it sounds like you guys have had kind of a similar landing spot.
And there's other people who are key people who don't see eye to eye on all those things. In fact, we have a awesome guy in our church. He's a retired pastor. He helps out with like the older folks group, and we cut up together every time they have their monthly lunch. And he's like, I'm dispensational, but your pastor's covenant theology. We give each other a hard time, and it's just like, it's normal that who cares if we disagree on this, and it's not something we have to avoid either. He jokes about it all the time, just to poke fun. And but what unites us is way more than that. And it's been so awesome to see that heart with so many people here. When you're seeing just coming in for the first time and like, oh, here's this person over here. They just became follower of Jesus. They just got baptized, a month ago. And here's what God's doing in their life. And that's multiple people where that's happening. We just had a guy this last Sunday who just got baptized, who had been coming for a while, connected through our basketball outreach that we do. And he's like, he told our pastor, he's like, I've never been around Christians who I didn't feel like were judging me, is basically what he said, that idea. And he was just like, when you have a place where that's happening, it's so life-giving. And so many people in our church, that's what drew them to our church. And we have a good friend of ours, one of our former teens from years ago at our first ministry, who is moving here to be a part of our church community. And he's like coming from a place where there's been some struggles, and he's like, I want to go to a place like that. And it's just been really cool to see God work, even as there's always challenges, there's always things, especially we have property and facility to keep up, which is a blessing and curse. It's there, we can use it for things, but it's also it doesn't pay for itself either. And just overseeing some of that, but it's just been awesome, where the heart of the people from the top down is this: we're here to reach people, to be a light. And it's just been fun to be a part of, and to breathe that air again, and to contribute again, and to bring our experiences, where I'm not just another person. It's, hey, I'm part of the team. I'm part of what's going on here, and valued. And that's been awesome for sure. So
yeah, praise God for that, man. And like the more extreme expression of my views, which I think is still accurate that I hold it, but like, how hard do I hold this view? How strident am I about this view? Is like, it's softened a little bit in this environment where I'm like, look, I know the building isn't the church. I could tell you all the reasons why I don't think the building is the church, but having a building, and ours is paid off, and we're really grateful for that. But like, having a building that this community can use for things does present some really neat opportunities for us to be hospitable in a unique way to a larger group of people. It allows us to have, more kind of interesting opportunities. We run a resource center for people who are underprivileged communities who don't have as much, and we run a donation center, and we have people in there who can speak both English and Spanish to kind of navigate, because there's a lot of people in our area who are primarily Spanish speaking, who are on the lower income side of things that need some help. And it's like, that's a unique opportunity we have because we have a building where before I might have said, like, but we really ought to find a way to just do that with just like the people getting together somehow and doing it. It's like, okay, yes, but we have a building and we can use it for that. Or even, like a sermon. It's like, I don't think that this has any, I don't see any in the New Testament, any like captive teaching to the same audience every week. I see, most of the sermons seem to be kind of impromptu public proclamation in front of unbelievers, right? Peter stands up on a roof on the day of Pentecost and delivers this thing that's your pericope in your Bible says Peter's sermon. And it's like, okay, but it's not like to the church. But teaching happens, and teaching is dialogue. Teaching happens in a bunch of different ways. But hey, if there's a teaching conference where we're going to go through Philippians, and that's like what the event is on a Sunday, I think of it like a teaching conference that has like a little concert before that. That's not something that the church shouldn't do or couldn't do. It's something that's still beneficial, as long as we're not forgetting the main things, which is life as people who want to, who desire to be more and closer followers of Jesus, being ever more transformed into his image as a community, as a witness to the world around us that Jesus is who he says he is, so that they see our love for him and for one another, and they want a part of it. And I feel really grateful to be able to say that that's where we've landed. It sounds like you're in a similar boat. So the key thing for me is, like, again, there was the whole finding ecclesia in church hurt, and then finding a church culture, a church community where it's not set up with the things that allow for the one ring to tempt people to be able to consolidate power and then cram down a vision for how things are going to go. I'm not even saying that that's exactly what was happening in our old church communities, because again, I love the people that I was connected with. I know you love the people you were connected with too. But there's sort of like a healthy version of conflict, especially when there's doctrinal disagreements and things like that, and there's an unhealthy version. And as far as I'm concerned, a lot of the unhealthy stuff is the stuff that misses the point of the fact that you're talking to another human being who's either a believer and therefore your brother in another part of the body that you exist as a vital part of, someone that Jesus especially loves, that he died for, that he died to rescue, that is currently a citizen of his kingdom, or even if not that, nevertheless an image bearer that God loves and wants to rescue, right? Like, if we lose sight of the fact that anytime we're in a disagreement with a person, a human being that has inherent dignity and worth, in favor of prioritizing something else because I've got this event that needs to go on, or I've got this movement that views this as like the non-negotiables, these are the mission critical things we think the Christ followers need to have, or we have this event, or we have this building, or we have this nonprofit, or this institution. Like, if we're prioritizing those things, that's when people get hurt. But like, what are some things that you would say have looked like healthy conflict? Because I've certainly had conflict since we've come into this new community. But if the tone of it, the feel of it is so much different because the disagreement is still met with love. But like, what are some things you would say make unhealthy conflict? And what are some things that you think make for healthy conflict or good conflict that leads to people growing in Christ together?
Yeah, I think a huge thing for me is learning how to ask questions. If you're in a place where you're not allowed to ask questions, or there's certain questions you're not allowed to ask, that's a big red flag. Um, even if it's something like, well, who is Jesus? Is he really God? Like, I'm glad somebody asked that question because I have an answer for that. Hopefully, if you don't have an answer for that, that's a different problem. But all the
Yep.
questions are welcome for people who are seeking, and I think that's be especially as in a leadership role, whatever that looks like, even just as a father and a husband. I want those questions to come and to have that open dialogue where people feel like they can ask questions about anything, and there's not going to be a judgment, there's not going to be shame of feeling less than, or to whatever. It's having that continued open door. And then on like the leadership side, as we're figuring things out, we're planning things or trying to navigate difficult situations, is we're doing this together. It's not, like you said, it's not one agenda. It's, here's an idea. What do you think? Um, we're trying to. It was something we had in our last meeting. It was a good thing, a potential opportunity, and it was something that was like, man, this would be great. But it's we're able to share like it's just not the right time. We're not ready for this, and everyone's like, oh yeah, and we're able to talk through that. And I think a lot of that comes from a leaders who are willing to be disagreed with, in the right way, and to model that vulnerability that, hey, I don't have it all figured out. Hey, this is a situation that we need time and care to figure out, and to get a multitude of counselors to speak into this. And I think that's a big part of it that's helpful for me, because
Yeah.
I laugh. I could be the wet blanket sometimes. I'm like so logic brain, and my wife has helped me a lot, with having more grace. And sometimes she'll say something, and I just shoot it down very quickly without even thought. Cause like, well, that'll never work. And so, try not to do that. But also, if that's how I'm wired and gifted, there's, hey, what about this? And what about this that we may not have thought of, that, we want to get this, but we want to do it well. How do we manage that? Or with this person has this need, how can we best, meet that? Um, and just keeping that door open as much as possible. So,
Yeah. And letting all that you do be done in love, right? I think for me, like the things when I look back are, it was always so surprising when someone's outright, obviously, demonstrably sinful behavior was tolerated or even justified because they believed the right things, right? They believed the thing that was towing the party line. And so, like, there was a person who, in terms of the church's doctrinal statement, it was a fairly vanilla Southern Baptist kind of an approach. Um, that was what was on the statement of faith. So like they covered all of those things. They towed the line there. They were like same views on alcohol, same views on modesty of dress, same views on all these other things that I would say are, it's not that they're unimportant, but it's not like mission critical. This is, everybody who disagrees with this is not a follower of Jesus or something. Um, and yet, like, there were outright, like, blatant lies told by that person that were like that were proven false, and there was no repentance expected, or there was no apology as like a precondition for being in good standing in the community or something like that. It's like when we start to make, does this person have the same beliefs that I do, the litmus test for whether they're good or not, or they're in the right, and we excuse behavior that we shouldn't be excusing, that is unbiblical, that is the kind of thing that Paul would be writing you a letter about if it was happening and he saw it happening. That's where we get way off course. And I don't limit that because I think of the church as all believers everywhere. I don't limit that to like what happens in our local community. I do that on YouTube too. If someone agrees with me on this or that other thing, but they behave in a way, they make it an action in a way, they say something in a way that is backbiting or destructive, I have zero problems with pointing out, hey, you shouldn't do that. Like, that's
yeah,
wrong. You shouldn't be doing that. We should be calling
yep,
balls and strikes, I guess
yeah,
is what I'm trying to say. And that would be like, man, how do we break out of that even in our own lives? It's obviously there's a unique temptation when there is an organization that has an official document and that there are people's jobs on the line. If there's like disagreement on some of these things, how do we navigate those difficulties without tolerating stuff? But like even in my own personal life, it's like how I really want to always be cultivating the attitude of, I'm not going to give that person a pass to just blank check act however they want, and I say nothing if just because they agree
yeah,
with me, right? Like we can't just limit it to we believe the same things, therefore they're right about everything, or they're in the right about everything. And I think
yeah.
that's another thing that we need to keep
And
track of.
kind of a similar on the other side is giving people the benefit of the doubt on not character issues, sin, but of, hey, you
Yeah.
said something that, whether doctor or whatever, that I didn't agree with, or that sounded wrong to me. And rather than, broad brushing this person with all these other things, of actually, what do you mean by that? And having that care enough, because that was how some of the people that we were with the situation, those certain things said, and I was like, if you took 5 minutes to actually have a conversation, I could have dispelled almost everything you just said if you had given me the benefit of the doubt to actually pick up the phone and talk to me or have a meeting with me. And I think that's a dangerous thing, in a church community when that is not the case, where gossip and, accusations and slander and all these things are going around by, oh, this person did this and that. And it's like, why not actually go to that person, find out what's going on,
Yeah.
or if you're confused, just find out. And at least then you can know if there's a disagreement and what to do about it. But that's love
Yeah.
prefers others and gives the benefit of the doubt in those situations in 1 Corinthians 13. And it, like you
Yeah.
said, you can have all the right things, you're right, teaching all this stuff, but if there's not love coupled with it, what's the point of it? Then you're
Yeah. You're just a noisy cymbal or a creaky
Mhm.
gate. There's what power is there, Yeah, I have unique thoughts about this because unfortunately I will still occasionally, o- overhear more or less that like my wife and I are still being brought up in that old community and people who inhabit that old community on kind of both the English side and the Spanish speaking side. And there are, stories being told. I haven't had contact with any of those people in a year and almost a year and a half at this point. And nevertheless, it's like whole stories are being invented about what must be going on in our life and what must be happening and what's taken place since then. It's like you haven't spoken a word to me. And this is kind of a unique thing that you're helping me process right now that I hadn't really thought about, that is painful to kind of recognize, but I'm glad we're doing it. Is like in that community, the number of people who reached out to me to see what was going on from our side, there were 2 people total that reached out to talk to me about what was going on afterwards. I think a good portion of the people who didn't reach out that might have were people who like didn't consider it worth the risk, we might say, to be associated with me or to be seen conversing with me, having conversations with me. But that's concerning, right? Where it's if there's no ability, like you said, no ability to ask questions or asking certain questions is going to give you, get you looked at askance. That's a red flag. Having, the measure, the litmus test of whether someone is in the right, we agree on these doctrinal issues. That's also wrong because it's not the Christian life is not reducible to having all the right answers on the Scantron test. It's also maybe more importantly the inner character and the focus that we have on being a follower of Jesus whose aim is to be more like him. But then it's like, what do we do when there is gossip? What is the response that we have when there is slander and gossip and people being misrepresented? And is that something that we want to get out in the open, or we want to keep in private, hushed conversations behind closed doors? Like, is it that I don't think of that as a measure of a real healthy community. So these are things that maybe even an answer to questions we were asking way back in our first video. It's like those are things that we could probably, with a fresh perspective, having now gone through some experiences ourselves, be able to say, yeah, I mean, that makes the difference in a healthy community that we're already feeling for ourselves, is the difference between, can it be reducible to the golden rule of Jesus saying, treat others the way that you would want to be treated? Is it reducible to the proverb of one man states his case, one man states a convincing case until someone comes along and examines it, or even what I think is what I call the platinum rule of Jesus to his disciples, saying, a new commandment I give to you, that you love one another as I have loved you, so you are to love one another. And if it's not behavior that's becoming of Jesus, or someone who claims to be being conformed more into his image, or at least desiring to, then we should call that out too, if it's not present. So anyway, so there's another angle to this, unless there's something else you'd like to cover before we get to the kind of the last thing I know we both wanted to talk about. It's been good to catch up on your story, my story, where we've come from, what kinds of experiences we've gone through, and how God's been good to us through it. But is there anything that you'd like to cover?
I think it will segue into this last part. And
Yeah.
it's interesting, and I'm sure you probably have similar thoughts of once you go through that kind of situation where the exit is not ideal, to put it mildly.
Hmm.
There's always that thought in the back of your mind, is this going to happen again? That temptation is there, whether founded or not, to process through. And I was curious if you've had thoughts and had to process through that. I was talking with a pastor the other day and just some other friends of, just like, there's no reason here why that thought should even be there, but there's like that 1% that may be there for the rest of my life. And
Yeah.
until we get to the,
Yeah.
the end of all things when that won't be there anymore, but maybe that's just part of the story of your life, if you want to call it emotional scarring, whatever it is, where it's going to be part of your
Hmm.
life for good or bad or ugly that you can use to help other people, but it's always going to be a thing, always going to be that temptation to not attach where you're at fully because of the more you attach, the more you can get hurt again. Because that's who hurts you the most, the people you're closest to. And even just recognizing that this may not be a forever place for us, long term. I don't know where the next 5, 20 years, what will change. We're not looking to go anywhere. We're very content, and I hope God keeps us here for as long as He wants us to be. But even, and maybe that's my planner brain. It's like, run through contingencies. If this happens, what I do. That, you know.
Yeah.
Anyway, I kind of rambled there, but curious.
No, that's between the two of us, I'm the one rambling. Don't worry about that. No, I definitely, man, I thought about this in some pretty unique terms where I was thinking of it as an injury, because again, the body metaphor in the New Testament is
Yeah.
just so front and center as a way of thinking about this, and Paul just making so clear that if one member of the body is injured, then the others are supposed to come
Yeah.
around it and aid in its healing. At least that's what a healthy body would do. And if I think Jesus wants to have a healthy body, then that's what I'm expecting to have happen. But there's a sense in like, you can always, you're a preacher, you know how this works. You can press a metaphor way too far. But like sometimes there's some helpful things you can go along the way if you kind of like look at maybe some different nuances of that metaphor. So for a bodily injury, there's definitely ways in which you can be so injured, you tear fully tear a muscle, you break a bone, you like tear a ligament, something really bad happens there. Um, then there's a serious break. And if it's a bone, it needs to be reset first in order for there to be healing, right? Or if there's a tear in the muscle, then sometimes there's surgery to reattach things, right? Like someone needs to come in who is a professional who knows what that thing is supposed to look like and can aid in putting that part of the body back together again for there to be healing. Um, and that's when there's something really, really, really serious, right? Like infidelity would be something I would
Mhm.
consider like that is like an absolute destructive break in the body's function. Something awful happened there and it needs to be set right. And so that's going to require, who did the breaking? There's got to be repentance there. There's got to be so making right. And how do we make this whole? If it's I can't give you back
Yeah.
a whole marriage if
Mhm.
there's infidelity, right? I can't give you back this thing. But then also you can't force forgiveness. So there's all kinds of things there that need to be navigated. But like I personally feel like what we went through didn't quite meet that full
Mhm.
standard. Um, and I just am trying to be objective and say, like, I've heard
Yeah.
stories and experiences that people have had where there was
Yeah.
abuse that was a whole order of magnitude worse than anything that we faced. Um, and so I want to leave space for that to say, yeah, man, that's, you know, sometimes I don't ever want to like you're never going to be amputated from the body of Christ
Yeah.
ever. But sometimes like if there's such a brokenness in that part of the body, like you just think for example, if there is a cancer growing on this part of your arm and
Yeah.
it's going necrotic and it's going to metastasize and there's all kinds of danger to the whole body even if this part was healthy before,
Mhm.
like we were hurt. Maybe we were the fingers, but if we needed to get removed as well as the cancer in order for the rest of the body to be healthy, I don't know. Again, maybe you can press
Yeah.
the metaphor too far, but I think that us leaving was a necessary part. We were injured in a way that wasn't
Yeah.
going to make it so that we could heal in that
Yes.
body anymore. And then there was a cancer that unfortunately wasn't removed, and was still there, and still seems to be spreading. And there's a lot of danger for the rest of that body there, and that's a hard thing. But like, you still need to be a part of the body. You can't remain an amputated body part. You need a transplant. You need to find a place where you can plug in and be part of a healthy and functioning body, where people can be together and be in healthy relationship with one another. And so for a minor injury, this is kind of how I came to think about it. For a minor injury, like if I strain my back, I'm going to need a combination of work and rest to get that part of my body helping again or healthy again and functioning. So I'm going to need to have rest where I'm not putting a bunch of heavy weight upon it, but I'm also going to need to use it. I'm going to need to stretch my back and move my back around and slowly work that part back up to being load bearing. I need to have the whole muscle run from its full range of motion, from all the way expanded and all the way contracted. And that's going to be an important part of its healing. So for example, like for us, what I thought I needed to do, because I felt like we were kind of a minor injury there and we wanted to get it back into place in another community, was like I leaned into what I thought I needed to be doing, which was being forgiving, being loving, and being really honest about where I landed doctrinally. That was the muscle that I needed to work. You know what I mean? Like, and then viewing how that is met in the body I'm trying to see if I'm a transplant fit for, right? Like, if me stretching and contracting and being like honest and working the muscle of laying out all my doctrinal stances and being super clear about where we're coming from, if that's what I needed to do in order to heal, and I was in a community where that was met with suspicion, it's like, I can't heal here. I'm not going to be welcomed here for doing the thing that I think I have to do in order to heal. But I found a place where no, like the body we found ourselves part of was able to look at our situation and say, it makes complete sense. And I'm really thankful that you're being so honest and so forthright. And to a person, everyone around us, even like there are people that I met and we were there right before, like even 2 weeks before I was going to go and debate James White, who, told me that they were Calvinist, and we had this great conversation. I'm like, yeah, so I'm debating James White here in a couple of weeks, just like laying it out there, because I'm an open theist and I disagree with him on this or that thing. And there were a couple of moments where they're just like, oh, whoa, really? And it wasn't, whoa, really, you're an open theist? Oh gosh, we better call the authorities to get this guy taken out here, run out of town on a rail or something. It was more like, you're debating James White? How did that come about? And like a whole other feeling. But we were rewarded, I guess the point, because now I'm rambling. The point was that like we were rewarded in that sense. The community was there for us through what we needed in order to heal, which was laying out our story and being super forthright and being super honest. That was what we required in order to be able to heal. And they were there for us, and we were a transplant match. Now I'm mixing metaphors because it's like you're taking a kidney. It's not like working a muscle, whatever. But I don't know if any of that was helpful, but that's how I've come to think about it.
And the challenge, as we know, is there is no perfectly healthy body in every facet. And there's always the risk of attaching, and trying to make it better, but, things can happen in time. Satan, that's what he does. He gets in where the most problems happen. It's within the body, to attack. And it helps to be more aware of it for ourselves, and as certain things we may be able to pick up on quicker than other people, maybe perhaps just because of to sniff those things out as quickly as possible. And like it's going with that, the back metaphor, sometimes you need a professional help. You need a chiropractor. I don't think my wife would be upset me sharing this. She was going to counseling over this last year with a Christian counselor, and it was super helpful. Her layers are much deeper than mine. She grew up in a pastor's home in certain circles and things like that. So certain more layers she's had to work through that this kind of re-triggered. And that's good, whatever that looks like for people to find that place where you have the space to do that. um, in your body, local church body.
And the ecclesia, it can come from
Exactly.
anywhere, right? If that, I don't know if that person that was there in that counseling capacity for your wife was part of the church community y'all ended up at, but it was a member of the body of Christ. And that's something that is so comforting to me too, is like I meet people, I'm currently working a sales job, and I meet people frequently who are believers. And it's like it's almost the same feeling as like I found another, Nuggets fan or Broncos fan. I'm on vacation in Florida and I see a guy with a Broncos hat on. I'm like, hey, like we have that thing in common, but at so much more fundamental a level. It's like we're not even in the same like neighborhood, but I know a person over there now who loves Jesus. That's
Yeah,
amazing. And they can come around you in so many different ways and from so many different
yeah,
places. Of course, having a local version of that is so important too in your day-to-day life and wherever you do your life and whatever you're doing. But um, yeah, I absolutely agree that having people who are professionals is sometimes a requirement. It is sometimes a requirement, and and that's sort of the stuff that I would think of as like your wife seems to have had a more serious
yeah,
injury than I did or than you did, and needed some of that help
for
to
sure.
come alongside and make sure that she was in a position where she could
Yes.
heal and that it was going to be able to move forward. Yeah, dude, so rich. There's so much there. I could talk to you for hours, I'm sure. But there's kind of one last thing that I think we were both wanting to touch on, which is something that still brings me a lot of joy when it comes to this discussion is kind of the eschatological piece and um, knowing ultimately that the eternal status in relationship of everybody who has been a part of the body of Christ is, we might say, with kind of a double meaning, a glorified body with no spot or blemish, where there's nothing broken and nothing is out of joint. You know, that there is
Yeah,
hope for broken relationships. That you know, in our context, the people that were so deeply integrated in our lives, I dream about them probably 3 times a week, and I miss them terribly. They were our closest friends in that season of life. And like their kids, their daughter, their son, their daughters were just precious, precious to us, like as close, almost as close as our own children. And I know our children felt the same way about them. And there's a brokenness now that we grieve, that we mourn, that we recognize it's not the way that it should be, as all death is, for a believer. But it's like there's a promise for newness of life. And that's just brings me so much hope and so much joy to know that even if I live 100 years and this never gets fixed in that time, that there's going to be a time where millions of years into the eschaton, we're just going to look back on it like an old story, something that happened that we just can't even remember what it felt like anymore.
yeah, and that's been a big.
What does that look like for you, man?
That was a big thing. The word hope was kind of our word
Hmm.
through this. In fact, our daughter, who's soon to be born, that's gonna be her middle name is Hope, because of that. And
Wow.
the the people in that community that we're no longer with, that we miss, that our kids still ask about. Hey, I miss this person. And, we're gonna have all of eternity to have that. And I'm curious how the initial beginning
Yeah.
of that will be. If there's gonna be some awkward of hey, um, but there will be that healing and that time. And then there's also people that in our local community outside the actual church, but our friends stuff there that we don't get to see anymore either. And that there's probably a lot we may never see again on this side of eternity. That's been a grounding thing. Is
Yeah.
as rough as that is, I'm have all of eternity to have those relationships again, and they're going to be perfect in its fullness. And in a similar
Yeah.
way, people like you that I've not met in person, and I hope to one day, but I don't know if I will on this side of it. There's several other wonderful
Yeah.
people that have been huge helps, just that I've only met online. Some I've gotten to meet in person, which has been fun, but it's like we're gonna have all of eternity to fellowship together, to, as you said, reminisce and remember different things that happen and catch up on all those missed details, and that lost time is not lost forever in that sense. Even though it's
Yeah.
like we wish we could have it now, but now we're in a place here and we have people where they're people now, in proximity. And that's our current phase of life, and to be able, I can enjoy that more fully, knowing that I'm still going to have that other one day, and time won't be an issue. So that's been a very grounding thing for me personally, where the eschatological part of it has been so helpful, and even I'm getting closer to finishing my master's, like finally write on it, as I'm hoping this summer
Exciting.
to be able to do, if I can, life calms down a little bit to finish all
Mhm.
my classes, but I'm still looking forward to developing that more, in a more tangible way. But it's been super helpful, and I'm super grateful for connecting with you before all this happened, to start having some of that, um, thinking change toward the future and what that's going to be like, and it just brings me hope.
Man, I'm so honored, and God, it's so beautiful. Yeah, everything that you just said. It's like it's not just it's just not broke. It's not only broken relationships being restored and made whole. It's it's thin
Yeah,
relationships being allowed to like really get connection, and even unestablished relationships being able to have an establishment and have like a long term, because like I've thought often, I'm like, I don't know how much time he would want to spend with me, but I technically have an unlimited amount of time to spend with the Apostle Paul if he wants to. Like if there's questions I have for him, or like I want to like get to know him a little bit, I'm like, it's possible he doesn't want to have anything to do with me, even there, like it's fine. um but to know that like there's technically no limit to the amount of time that I'd want to spend with any person that'll also be there, is so comforting. And like most things, having an eternal perspective is something that can be so transformative for how difficult it is to maintain, because like the circumstances of life and the day-to-day things, they tend to just beat down our understanding of things, and they tend to rob us of our ability to see beyond our circumstances or beyond the things that we can perceive, because we're so finite and we're so weak still, notwithstanding the fact that we have the Spirit that guides us into all truth. We are still human beings who have faulty memories and short memories, and a propensity to hold on to that which feels most painful rather than that which is most a gift and most life-giving from the hand of a good father who gives gifts to his children for them to enjoy. But I think about those things a lot. Um, it's dangerous to get too deep into the weeds in terms of what you think is going to happen timing wise in the eschaton, right? But I think for sure, like we've got the judgment happening pretty early on. It's all connected with the day of the Lord, biblically speaking, right? So the day of the Lord is the transition event from this age into the age to come. And the day of the Lord is always connected with God bringing judgment. Judgment not in the sense of, you know, angry Zeus throwing lightning bolts from Mount Olympus onto people who crossed him, but more God setting things right, or as N.T. Wright might say, putting things to rights in his fulminating blunderbuss with a British accent. But like, if that's where things start, putting things to rights, I believe, is going to involve putting right relationships that were
yeah,
broken, making us right, healing us, putting us the way that we should be, where right now we're a shadow of our, N.T. Wright's always pointing out, like, people are, if you're sick or injured or withering away, or you're in your old age, you're a shadow of your former
yeah,
self, right? But there's a sense in which even at our best, we're a shadow of our future
yeah,
selves. Um, when we're made into who we're going to be for eternity, who we were designed to be, who we were intended to be, who God had in mind when he made us in the first place, before sin and the wreckage of being in a world that is no longer like Eden because it's sin and death and war torn. Like, I think that a major component of that very early on in the events is going to be a setting right of relationships. And in my view, again, I don't want to get too dogmatic about it. Good men differ. But the way that I think about that is that that probably has to be done before the wedding feast is completed, and we're sitting at however the seating arrangements work at the wedding feast of the Lamb, where Jesus is inaugurated in full as king and ruling and reigning over the world, and heaven and earth are one, and that's kind of the consummation marriage image, right? Like, I think it has to be done before that. I think that however long that takes, the right retelling of every story, the right vindication of every wrongly placed motive, the restoration of every broken relationship, I think is a major part of God's transformative work at the very beginning of that thing, so that we can enjoy it for all eternity. And whether that takes an instant or minutes, hours, weeks, months, years, decades, however long it takes for that all to happen, I think that has to happen before the eschaton, as it was meant to be, is going to be able to be kicked off in earnest. And so for me, where I usually place my thinking is after all that is set right, where I'm usually like putting my focus is not even on like the transition into that age. Beautiful as what little concrete imagery the Bible does give us, as beautiful as that is, what it talks about way more is what it's going to look like on the other side of even all of that transitional stuff. It's like the details about the transition is not even that important, biblically speaking. It doesn't seem to be like the main point of emphasis. It's like, yeah, the day of the Lord's going to happen, and then every enemy is defeated. The last enemy to be defeated is death, and then life unto the age, right? The age to come is there in fullness. And I think that that's where the Bible's training us to put our thinking. And when it comes to this relationship piece, man, brings me a lot of joy to know that, because these people are believers, and I believe they are believers. And, there's a conversation there about like once saved, always saved, and apostasy and things like that, which would throw a whole big spanner into the works here. But like, if I believe those people are believers and that they've accepted the rescue that comes from trusting in Jesus, then I can celebrate now in advance of their restoration and healing and their being set right and their being put right, because I believe I'll see them there, whether I see them ever again on this side. The people who ended up, spreading really crazy lies about me and my wife, I do believe are believers. Crazy as that might sound, it's not. They weren't acting very Christ-like when it happened, but it brings me a lot of joy to think about the fact that, well, even if I dream about them 3 times a week for the rest of my life, and I never see them again, I never see their kiddos again, my kiddos never see their kiddos again, and even if they keep like inventing stories about me and my wife and poisoning people against us as people and all that, even if that continued on, if they are under the blood of Christ and under grace and destined for that eternal rescue, and they will be saved forever in that sense, I'll see them again. It's really, really joyful for me. So, bang. Well, brother, man, that's a good place to end on. So I hate even to do this, but is there anything else that we haven't talked about or covered that you'd like to look into, or just break? I'm sure we could again talk for another hour or two.
Man, I feel like we covered so much, and maybe eventually we'll have a part 3 and always more stuff on this topic.
Would be delighted.
But yeah, it's just been it's always helpful to process things out, with friends. And that's been a big part. I'm very thankful for you and several others. I won't even try to name them all because I would miss some that were huge part of helping us walk through that. We went through that season, and it was so life-giving and helpful knowing we weren't alone, we weren't crazy, and that there was hope through it all. And so I'm extremely grateful for your friendship and the community, the Facebook community, with others that are in there, and so many beyond that God has brought into our path. So it's humbling and exciting. So
yeah, right back at you, man. I'm so grateful that God saw fit to cross our paths, because you've been a major encouragement and shot in the arm more than a few times to me. And I've benefited greatly from having known you in that way too, for sure. And grateful we have an eternity ahead of us too. But I guess if we're going to wrap this up for people in a takeaway, there is hope. There is hope for even broken relationships. That it's not the end of the story. That if you're going through a hard time, if you've been injured, it's not the end of the story. But hopefully we've given people some things to chew on as far as deciding, do they stay or do they go? How do they stay if they stay? How do they go if they go? If you've been injured, how serious is the injury? Do you need a professional to come in and help you get to the place where you can start to heal even? what does a community look like where you can go and be a part of it and heal and continue to grow, because like neither you nor I has arrived. We don't pretend to. I still have so many areas in which I need correction and character growth, but that's going to happen in a community where it doesn't have an autoimmune disease that breaks you down when something gets hurt, or that cuts out healthy parts of the body and favors unhealthy parts of the body. If you're in a healthy body, it's going to be looking for its own, mutual growth and healing whatever's hurt and whatever's broken. So hopefully we've given people some tools, at least that have been helpful
Yeah.
for you and me and our families when navigating this stuff. But I'm grateful for your time too, man. It's been an absolute blast, and I would love to do a part 3. I don't know what it'll be about. Hopefully we don't have any other crazy twists and turns in the story, but I know that there's a lot that we could talk about on other things too. So you'd be welcome back anytime.
Looking forward to it.
Wonderful. I got to do the kind of weird YouTuber-y thing. I know you are local ministry and you're operating in a kind of a local capacity, so it's not like, hey, where can people go find you and what you're working on. But if people did want to know where Josh Ham is and what Josh Ham is working on, and even how to pray for Josh Ham, what are some of those things that you'd put out there for people to look at?
You can find me on Facebook. I'm in the Overlap Life community group and a few others, Church Split and Trinity. I'm working on my master's at Trinity Theological Seminary with Dr. JP and Braxton Hunter and all those guys. And Will Hess is around there too. No, give him a shout out. So just some awesome people. And,
Friends of the family over
yeah,
here for sure.
and
we love those guys.
yeah,
All of them.
so I'm not hard to find on that front, and we have baby number 4 on the way here soon, and so we ran out of hands already, so we're just gonna figure it out now as we go, and so looking forward to this next chapter of life, and as we're still getting settled here in Georgia or just in the Atlanta area, and maybe I'll even be able to cross paths with Warren one of these days. So that'd be fun, but
That
yeah,
would be
so
cool.
I know he's somewhere in this
Yeah.
vicinity, but it's we're anyway, can be helped anybody, reach out anytime. So
Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. Well, thank you, man. As always, been a massive pleasure, and look forward to seeing you posting more psych gifts in the group.
for sure.
Sweetness.